Okay, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us on this latest episode of our webinar series. In this session, we're joined by a special guest, Gary Palmer, who's going to be talking about his warts and all experience on migrating to Qlik Cloud from Qlik Sense Client-Managed. Just to introduce myself, so normally it would be Neil Thorne hosting today, but he has unfortunately got COVID. He is on the webinar, but he's a little squeaky right now. So for those that don't know me, I'm Chris Lofthouse. I'm the commercial director here at Ometis. And as I say, we are joined today by a special guest, Gary Palmer, who is the IT director at Forbidden Planet. And he'll be talking and presenting his experience of moving from Qlik Sense Client-Managed to Qlik Cloud. Before we get into Gary's presentation, I'll just cover off some housekeeping. So this session has already started to be recorded. It will be distributed on LinkedIn, YouTube, and other social channels later this week. We do have a Q&A function to ask any questions, so please do ask those questions as Gary is talking, and we may choose to interrupt politely, Gary, on your whilst you're doing your presentation, and ask those if they're particularly timely and so forth. If not, we might just save them to the end, and if you do want to come off mute and ask them using microphone, please do feel free to raise your hand as well. Most of the people just looking at the attendees list I can see are existing Qlik and Ometis customers. There are a couple that I see that are less familiar to myself at least. So just to introduce Ometis as a company, we're the UK's largest dedicated Qlik consultancy. We are one of 3 elite partners here in the UK. We are dedicated to Qlik platform and have some complementary technologies such as Snowflake and Databricks, which we also partner with. We are now just over 30 experienced staff, so that has grown a bit since webinars earlier in the year, and we're also around about 225 customers, give or take. We are a one-stop shop for Qlik in terms of licenses, consultancy, development. We've got a UK dedicated support desk, which also now does extended hours. So if you need 5:30 to 5:30 support 7 days a week, we can help you with that. And we also have a dedicated Qlik trainer as well, with a host of a catalogue of courses ranging from data literacy to the fundamentals of Qlik, but also branching out to data engineering and specific dedicated courses which specialize in geomapping and so forth within the Qlik platform. And now I'm going to hand over to you, Gary, if you want to take control of the screen. And
I thought you were going to do it all for me, Chris. So I'm just going to keep on going. I might sit here and listen. I thought it was quite good. So, I'm going to present my screen. Hopefully you can all see my screen. Fingers crossed. So,
yeah, that's all good.
As Chris informed you, I'm Gary Palmer. I'm the IT director of Titan Entertainment Group within Planet Limited. And yeah, today is me moving to Qlik Cloud. We were an on-prem Qlik Sense user, and this was our journey of moving to Qlik Cloud. So I'll just give you a rundown of who I am and what I do. 30 years in the IT industry, working for the leading science fiction retailer. If you haven't heard of Forbidden Planet, then look up the website that's at the bottom of the screen, and you'll find everything to do with sci-fi on our site, and you can come and spend your hard-earned money buying our wonderful products. I've been 29 years developing in FileMaker Pro, which is our core CRM, and that's what started our journey in data management and development. And about 9 years ago, I basically partnered with Ometis. I researched to look for a BI platform, and I looked at all the ones that were out there and decided and landed on Qlik, and then partnered with Ometis to then start our journey of moving some of our data sets into a BI platform and then utilizing that for our staff. What I hope you get from the webinar, an insight of the benefits of moving from Qlik Sense on-premise to Qlik Sense Cloud. As I say, we started on our journey just, I think, when Qlik Sense had just come out. So I think it was out for about 9 months. It was QlikView beforehand, and then Qlik Sense came out. So I've never used anything pre-Qlik Sense. So I've always started at that level. We deployed our server and then started rolling out our solutions and trying to find a platform of what we wanted. And I will go through that a little bit in that journey. We are a 45-year-old retail and publishing company. We have 10 Qlik Sense published apps. We have around about 50 users and about 900 million records across our stack of what's being displayed in Qlik Sense. External data sources, we have various external data sources, 4 main ones. I say FileMaker fuels a lot of those, but FileMaker actually goes and grabs data from various other data sources and then collates that, and then we send it from there into Sense. We also go directly from SQL into Sense from online sort of premise as well, with like MailChimp and other services that we built apps for. From our journey of where we were going with Sense is the fact that we noticed that on-prem, which is and still is a great platform. There's nothing wrong with it. I do like it. I like the idea of having my own server, managing our own solutions, and have full autonomy of the end-to-end process. But of late, as Ometis will vouch, that Qlik is going down the route of there's more features coming out in Qlik Sense Cloud than there is for the on-prem. There's a lot more features that are available. If you work in a multi-user management sort of side of Qlik Sense, it's certainly geared in cloud a lot better to have multiple developers working on your applications than there is on-prem. Normally, you on-prem, you only get one user that can edit the file, and you have to change ownership and so forth, which is a bit cumbersome. Since in the cloud gives you a lot more freedom and flexibility on that. So that was one of the main reasons for moving. The other one was obviously management of the server, security, and so forth. So they were the key reasons why I looked at it. And I know that Chris, Neil, and Andy all were chasing me for several years to move to cloud. And I vowed never to do it, only because I like the environment that I was working in. But in the end, I caved in and decided to jump and try and move. So I'll go over the processes of what we did, how we got there, and our planning for that journey, really. Some pitfalls, obviously the pros are what the platform gives you in the cloud. Definitely, that's the key thing. But you can certainly go through some of the problems that we had and how we overcame those, and some key takeaways, hopefully, when you go through your journey. I don't know where you all are within your journey, or whether you're, as I say, Qlik customers already, which most are, according to Chris, and then whether or not you're thinking of moving to the cloud, or you've just moved to the cloud and you're curious about ways to make it work better. So as I said, the key reasons why was multi-user admin. That's one of the biggest ones that we stumbled across, because I wanted to diversify the levels of management within the platform, and 2 of my developers are actually on this call, so I won't shout them out because they'll get embarrassed, and that's fine. But I wanted to actually have more people being able to manage the stack of work that we have within the platform. And as I said, on-prem, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It works very well, and it's got some really cool features. But to have that multi-user access was a bit of a challenge. Less IT overhead, obviously managing the server, as I said, updating server patches. On average, Qlik, as you all know, if you're Qlik on-prem users, you get around about 3 to 4 releases of Sense every year, and you have to do those patching. Sometimes when you do those patching, it causes problems. Not many. Most of it is pretty solid, I will say, on-prem. But it's the point of every time you do a security patch from Microsoft, you just never know what you're going to be doing. The other benefit that we got out of moving to, obviously, Qlik Cloud was the point of easy access for the mobile app. So if we're on-prem, we've got to be able to then poke a hole in our firewalls because it's on our LAN. We've got to make that web WAN enabled to then allow the mobile app to then be used outside of our network. All possible, totally can be done, but it's just an added complication. It just works out of the box when you go to cloud. And then the final one there is absolutely what I was saying, is that point of future-proofing where you are within the stack. All the new features are going to come out on cloud first. That seems to be the release cycle for Qlik going forward now. And all those new features, you can choose to turn them on, turn them off within Qlik Cloud. You can have them as fast releases, slow releases. You have just more control over your releases. Whereas if you're doing a patch update on-prem, you're going to get that feature whether you like it or not. It's just going to be there and it'll be activated. So that gives you a bit more future-proof and a bit more scope and management within the solution. So we come up with a plan. So I sat down with the team and said, right, how are we going to migrate this? We looked at all of our data and our basically our setup within on-prem. So the first thing I did is obviously I went to Ometis and said, right, I'm looking to do this. I migrated my license over, and that basically gave me a tenant. So I then have a tenant I can deploy to. That was relatively simple. That didn't take long. I think it was a couple of days. I ended up with a license back and I was done. And then I can tell you the clock starts ticking. So you have a set time to migrate usually. Qlik will help you out with that and extend your license, because they did for me. So thank you very much to Qlik for allowing that extension, because we ran out of time in our migration. But at that point, you then see the platform, you've got your tenant. I would advise you to get a demo of the tenant online. You can start enabling the demo and getting used to the settings in there. If you are going to do a demo, I'll talk about the pitfalls and bits and pieces. But if you're doing a demo, I'd use an email account that you're not planning to use when you finally deploy, because Qlik tends to not be able to reuse an email address. I had problems with that, so I've had to create various email addresses when I was doing testing. So, and obviously I used the one that I was planning to use when my testing, and then when I came to do my final deployment, it was like, oh, we can't use that one because you've already used it. So, little takeaway: if you are going to do a demo, pick a random test email account that you want to do for your demo. And then when you're ready to do your final tenant, then register that with the actual email address that you want to use, whether that's your own email address and admin address or whatever you want to do within Qlik. So we went through that process, and we tried to register the email that was already done and realized we couldn't. So that was a little delay. So we went back to the drawing board, came up with a new email address, which sounds right, straightforward, deployed our tenant. We knew the settings that we wanted to hold within the tenant. There's various setups and changes and configs that you can change of how you want the tenant to act. I'd certainly go to Ometis if you don't want to read the huge document that comes with it for the deployment, which you're more than welcome to do, and you should know how to use the system, but definitely use Ometis to help you with that. I asked various questions to Chris and the team, and we've got some shortcuts around getting that set up in the way we wanted. When we got to that point, we decided to look at our on-prem settings that we've got and thought, right, plan one is quite straightforward. You can go to the QMC, you log into there, you've got a list of all your apps, you can export all those apps from the QMC, that's quite straightforward. You end up with all your QVF files come out, and then you can just import those into your tenant. So if you look at the logic of what we were seeing here, we think, right, export the apps, import those apps into Qlik Cloud, open those apps into Qlik Cloud, and then go, right, where are all the source apps of the scripts within the script editor of the each app? So at that point, we already have deployed on-prem that everything was pretty much right into QVDs. So our published apps are QVD sourced apps. So we have a builder that builds our individual files from CSVs, external sources, whatever source of data that we've got within our apps. We then brought that data into Qlik on-prem and outputted those QVDs. So I was comfortable that our main production apps should be able to pick up, load those apps, copy over the QVDs, which you can do. So you can go into the catalog in Qlik Cloud, and you can say, I want to upload some QVDs, and you can upload a whole folder of QVDs into a place of space, in effect, which you'll realize when you get to the tenant, you have spaces and other bits and pieces. So it's a way of organizing your files. We uploaded all the QVDs, and then we went, right, brilliant. Everything's there. We checked it and said, we've got all of the source files. We've got the app. We've repointed in the script to the paths to the space where the apps reside and where the actual QVDs reside. And we thought, right, we're good to go. We just press load, and how problematic can it be? Simple. This is easy. This is within about 3 hours, we'd migrated 3 or 4 of our production apps, and we pressed load. And when we pressed load, it didn't work. So, and there were various reasons why it didn't work. Mostly the main problem was, and I will get to this, it depends on your data sets. Our biggest problem on our big production apps, as I said, we had 900 million records, and we've got quite wide access points within our application. The reason why it didn't work is in on-prem, you are limited by the CPU power of your server, and that's about it. There doesn't seem to be any limits on-prem. When you move to the cloud, you are limited to a 5 gig application file. So if your application files are greater than 5 gig, you're going to have a problem when you go to load them in cloud, because it's going to say it's exceeding its upper limit of the application for cloud. Now, 5 gig is a vast amount of data. 5 gig is a hell of a lot of data to have within an application, and we only have 2 of our apps that went over it. The vast majority of apps worked. But one of the biggest problems we had, as I mentioned, is we have a QVD builder. So that's building our historical applications into QVDs. Now, most of them, you're going to have the problem with that 5 gig is when you get to loading your QVDs, as we're loading our historical data, I created a methodology of just having a very large archive of data, and I didn't really worry about it on-prem. So I literally was able to add data to this and created a massive QVD, and then I could cherry pick any sort of date range from that QVD, because that QVD is holding our history of data. And as I said, we're a 45-year-old company. To be fair, though, we were around, and our company was formed before computers really existed, to be honest. I remember the first day I was there, and it was a typewriter that was there, not computers. But we have around about 25 years of data that we're holding. And that's transactional data, because we deployed EPOS about 25 years ago. So we know every sale that's gone through our stores for the last 25 years. Me being me thinking, yeah, data's king, I just loaded a whole lot into one big QVD. So that's where you get some problems. So there isn't really an issue when you're deploying a tenant. I'll come to community sheets in a second. You don't really have any problems importing your apps. You don't have any problems importing the QVDs in your files of transparent. You just have a problem with updating your QVDs when you're running in cloud if you're using a large file. So the other thing that we found, I'll come back to the community, was when you deploy the app, you only get the application in its current form that's been published from on-prem. So if the users take the published app that you would have on-prem and the users create community sheets, those community sheets are lost unless you do something with them before you deploy. So that's something I learned. I deployed some of our apps and found out a load of our users create community sheets. Again, Ometis was there to save the day and help me out with that and advise me of various options and ways to doing this, which I'll explain in detail in a minute. The other thing you need to be aware of is if you're on-prem, I was a long-standing on-prem customer, so I had some extensions within our apps that were doing some smart buttons and smart views and so forth. Those extensions failed when we imported, so that caused us problems within our views, within the application, our sheet design, our button design, various things fell off. But it wasn't disastrous, they just need to be re-engineered for the more modern use of what Qlik Sense on-prem would give you and also what Qlik Sense Cloud would give you. They're all the same. It's just the point to note, if you are using extensions, be mindful that it might be wise that you stop using extensions and move to non-extension use. But there's so many features within the latest version of on-prem and in cloud that I'm not needing an extension within our solutions anymore. We just needed to rebuild what we had. So the only other thing that we found that was different was we use chaining within our load script, which is the last thing. When we load in data, when we build apps, it's just slightly different. So you have automations, which in cloud, where we could then chain link loads within the QMC on-prem. So the benefit of that, and to explain what that is as one script can load, you can load an application. You can then link within the QMC that on completion of that app loading, you can load the next app and the next app and the next app. So we had our morning update build. We loaded one app and then I chained it within the QMC to then go through, build a load of other QBDs and other bits and pieces. Once that's finished, then load the core apps from the result of what you've just outputted of QBDs. It is the same for different, as I've said. You have now automations that do that, which is more of a workflow sort of scenario like Zapier and stuff like that, where you would chain a process through in the cloud. Slightly different, as I say, but nothing that's untoward that you can't follow. You can also have automations link. There are ways of doing that. There are some much better features when it comes to cloud, which you can trigger things to run from external sources to force your updates to run as well. So that there are more features as far as it comes to that. So the solutions. So when you get to these problems, what we encounter is we had these issues. The one area that we certainly engaged our partner, so we spoke to Ometis various times, and the whole team helped out and gave us various scenarios. We found that there was an analysis tool, which we always had on-prem, but there is one for cloud that you can deploy. So it's basically an app, you import it in, you put it in the space where all your QBDs and your apps are, you run it, and it just loops through every single QBD, every single data point, every single app, and it gives you statistical information about each app. So you can instantly find out where there are problems within your apps. Like one thing we were doing a field that we created, and it was basically creating a compound field based on various scenarios within our data set. As a result, it was something like 64 million rows was a single field. So then we went back and thought, right, do we need that field? Is it integral to what we're doing? And it was. So we're like, right, okay, so that field is needed, but then you can see the data usage of that field within your application. And bearing in mind, you've got a 5 gig limit on your application, every bit that you can save in some of your larger apps will be useful. And that comes down to the build of a QBD splitter. And you can find these on the community. The community is great for this. So just basically put in there how to split a QBD into dates or the types of slicing the data. So I found what that did years and months. So we took a large QBD that I said, run it through this. It took about half an hour to an hour to do it. It loads, it loops through, finds the min and max dates, loops through, and then outputs yearly files of the data. Now that saves us trying to load from a large QBD doing a where. We just then loop through and say, right, if we've got a 3-year history in a file, we just pick up the latest 3 years from the QBDs that are there, and it's a much smaller set, which reduces your load. And by reducing that load, it means some of your apps will then actually fit within the 5 gig quite easily. Sometimes it doesn't still, and then you have to then play around with the data. And that came back to what we were saying with the certain fields. If you can find those fields that are large volume and large memory, you just re-engineer your system. So this was the curveball we had. Some of our big solutions took us a few weeks to go through that. We weren't working on it full time. We have other jobs to do, but it took us a few weeks to then re-engineer our process. So what we thought was going to be a very simple process of drag, drop, and deploy turned into several weeks worth of work. I'm not taking away from the fact it was quite straightforward to do. It was just those curveballs that if you don't know about them and you've got large apps, just be mindful of that and consider that as part of your deployment. So if you have got large apps, there are analysis tools, you've got monitoring tools on-prem. Have a look at your app size before you start this process. So be aware of where you are. Cool.
Just to confirm there, so the analysis tool you're referring to, that's the kind of out-the-box Qlik app, metadata monitoring app that you're referring to there, yeah?
Yeah, exactly that. So it's the one that's on-prem and it's just sitting there. You can literally run that over your solutions, and you can get a monitoring of how your on-prem solution is running and what app sizes you're using. Use that as a starting point. Have a look at it. And if you're getting anything close to 4.5 to 5 gig, then consider that. The other way is easy in the QMC. You can just look at your apps, and you can in the QMC you can see the size of your apps with the data in it. And that's one way of doing it as well. So you can you enable the column to say size of the app, and then you can see it in there.
And so, just quickly before we move on, so it's worth mentioning there. So you've also chosen to go down and stay on the user model. There is a capacity model for people looking at Qlik Cloud Analytics, which changes some of those thresholds as well. So on capacity, you get up to 10 gigabytes in memory app allowance per app. So if you do have larger apps, that could certainly help there. You've also got large app support, which is fair to say it's not cheap. Obviously consumes a lot of CPU, and we did have that conversation as well. But
we did.
Like you say, you kind of gone through, you stripped out I think we're at 21 years worth of historical data, and you've brought that down to, was it a few years, 7 years, something like that?
We got it down to about 7 years for our financials. We realised that's all they needed, and I spoke to the team, and there's the point that you can do within. You could probably do it on-prem, but the cloud, you can do dynamic app loading as well. So you could actually then enable, with a bit of work, you could get the user to put some parameters in and press a button, and within, I don't know, a minute it goes away and then reloads. Because we've got individual QVDs, we can build an app in effect on the fly for those users if they want history. So that's something further down the line that we're going to be looking at.
And out of interest, do you think users got frustrated with having less data, or do you think they just weren't using it anyway? What's your kind of thoughts on that? Have you had any feedback from the user base?
Yeah, to be honest, I think most people, well, one thing I wanted to say is the speed of loading. This is one thing I want to get to, and I will answer that question, Chris. The speed of loading an app, the smaller your files are, the faster cloud loads. That's the one thing I've noticed. Our on-prem was very fast to load large data sets, but the speed of CPU in the cloud, and we have a very good, I think Alex is on the call, but and he did some testing for us. We have a very fast VM infrastructure, and even our faster VM infrastructure, the CPU compute speed in cloud is way faster than what we can do on-prem. So we found a speed benefit. And to answer your question, Chris, is the fact that we trim the data sets back, which then makes everything work so much quicker, because you're not holding too much data within the data set. So it's a really good opportunity to prune and clean your solutions and deliver what's needed for the business, because there was a lot of obsolete data that wasn't really being used and being in the system. We just thought, oh, it's there. If someone then wants to interrogate 15 years ago, they could. But taking that away didn't cause any problems at all. If anything, one of our developers, that she does some high-end sort of analytics in her own app, I went back to her and said, look, if we wanted to trim your app, because it was one of those that was quite wide, she said, oh, I can go down to 2 years. I may only need to compare this year and last year, but you've always given me 7. I very rarely use it. We trimmed her down to 3 years, and she's more than happy. So we took 4 years out of the data set, and it's much smaller now, and I have no size constraints on that app at all.
Perfect. So what you could say there is an indirect consequence of moving and migrated to Qlik Cloud is you've done some optimization work there. Yep. You've applied a bit more best practice, just to put a salesy spin on that. And out of interest, so you've talked about obviously the QVD splitter app. Have you made use of the new folders capability that just got added, or is that coming just at the wrong time after you've done the migration?
That came at completely the wrong time. It's not to say I really wanted it, because that's the one thing I will say. When you look at your catalog, it's just a dumping ground of everything in one repository. There are filters on it. You can filter by data sets, by applications, and so forth. But having folders would be great. I sat down with the three of us sat down and went through it, and we were like, yeah, we want to use that. And then I read the whole article, and it's like, yeah, it's not a major issue to use it. It's just that if you start putting things in folders, you have to remember you have to load from those folders as well. So all your load scripts need to go under review. You're going to have a look at that and make sure it works. And bearing in mind, we have fully deployed cloud, I think 5 weeks ago. I'm trying not to touch the scripts for a little while. I wouldn't mind bedding it in. We've had months of work on this, and I just want to sit back and go, yeah, it's working. Users are using it. Everything's fine. So folders will come. We'll start using it. It's definitely a great add-on. But yeah, unfortunately, Qlik was a little late to the party for that. So
and one more thing just to point out as well. So you touched on automation. So it's fair to say one of the biggest bugbears of people looking at moving from client managed to Qlik Cloud is the lack of the task chaining. That capability is being worked on. It is on the roadmap, and we should hopefully see it relatively soon. But obviously, no guarantees. So do not make any buying decisions based on that information.
I have to say, as much as that's a problem, it's not a major one. There are solutions, there's ways around it. In the automations, the nice automations can do triggers. So if you've got a third-party system or something else that can trigger it, all it is a URL. So if you know the URL, in that URL is encoded basically the sign-on credentials to it, so it's secure. We use it. That we've got our processing systems that we're using in FileMaker. So we're creating, instead of having a link automation running or link script that we would have had before, we're getting our third-party solution. When it's finished writing files out, it calls Qlik Cloud and tells it to run the automation. So that's quite a nice feature to have. You could have a third-party hook, in effect, firing your reloads. So we use that a bit. And the other one which we liked as well, which we've started to look at, is allowing end users that are running analyzer licenses to be able to load data from a button click using automations, which is nice. So we just put that in. So if a user then wants to force an update because they've changed a supporting file, we're using Google, so we're using Google Workspace, and we've created a shared space in there and hooked Qlik Cloud to see that. So if a user then goes in and updates a sheet in there, they can then press a button and force the load to go straight away, which is a nice feature as well.
Yeah, nice.
And then that was mainly it. Is questions. So you hit the questions at the right point, Chris. So
perfect.
I'm
so
happy to stop sharing. So let me stop sharing.
Yeah.
And give you the screen back.
Let me share my screen again. So just whilst people start coming up with some questions, so remember there is a Q&A panel in the interface, so please do start asking questions. Just that one from me, Gary, and this wasn't one of the pre-canned ones that I prepped you with before the webinar. What's the general feedback been? So touching on what we were just talking about, what has been the general feedback from the business? Has it been positive, negative, neutral? How do you think it's gone?
Positive. The training was almost non-existent. I mean, people just had to have a new URL they logged into. The only thing is we hadn't deployed single sign-on or anything like that. Ours was tied, our on-prem was tied to AD, so that made life easy. We debated on how to do the sign-in for our users, and at that time we had just created users and so forth. So we went into the Qlik Cloud and then created users. You just type the person's email address, invite them, they get a link, they sign up, and then we published same spaces in effect as you publish streams in on-prem, their spaces on in the tenant and cloud. We then added the user to the tenant and then said, right, once they registered, we added them to a space, and then they saw the apps the same as what they had before. So there was almost no negative feedback. They just started working. I think the biggest risk is making sure your apps are updating correctly. I think that's the biggest work, making sure everything carries on working, and people trust the data. I'm a strong believer of governance of data and making sure that everything's correct. The last thing you want to do is have an app that's got incorrect data in it. So I think testing was the key thing. So.
And just touching on that a bit more. So as you mentioned at the start, so you've got around about 50 users. How did you approach that migration from a user perspective? Did you go down a big bang approach and just say, right, everyone, this is the new URL, on one day, or did you drip feed the users onto the new? We have
pro users, absolutely. We have pro users, so 3 or 4 pro users that are building loads of community sheets and bits and pieces, which I will get onto the community sheet thing because I didn't answer that, but I'll answer that as a separate question. So those pro users, we then got them into the tenant early. I'd say probably only about a week before everyone else, because once you got the data sets working and the apps are working, they're updating. So we then got those users into the system for probably about 5 to 7 days, and then we did an email blast out to everyone and said, right, here's the details, go and register, that's it. And Penny Ruddle, she managed that, and every time a new person registered, it came into the tenant, and then we added them to a space, and that was it, and they're up and running. And then eventually, after a week or 2, we turned the on-prem off and just said, right, that's it. So the links didn't work, that turned off, and that was fine.
Nice. That was a relatively short space of time in that case.
Easy migration.
Okay, perfect. I'm starting to see a couple of questions come through, so please do continue to put your questions in the chat. Just before we go into the full kind of Q&A session or part of the episode, I just want to talk about some of the things in how Ometis can also help you. So we obviously do health checks. So if you're interested in looking at migrating from client-managed or even Qlik View, so it doesn't have to be necessarily Qlik Sense, but it could be Qlik Sense or Qlik View on-prem to Qlik Cloud, we can do a health check to check for those extensions you might be using that might not be compatible, check for large apps, check for large fields that we could potentially trim and optimize before we do the migration as part of that. We do support. So Gary mentioned his use of support during that migration process. So if you are going down the data gateway approach, I know, Gary, you didn't use that option, we would help install and configure those as part of it, as well as the tenant itself. We also do services. So if you're interested in accelerating that migration process or simply bolstering the team so you can continue to do BAU within your data and analytics team, we can help you with that. Just touching on a couple of the other resources that Gary mentioned there as well. So you do have Qlik's Migration Center that has a number of resources dedicated towards migrating from Qlik to Qlik Sense, but also Qlik Sense Client-Managed to Qlik Cloud Analytics as well. So there'll be some prerequisites. It puts in there some planning documents and so forth that you can make use of. So I definitely recommend looking at that. There's also the help site and community, which Gary touched on as part of there, which, you know, that community is very active. So there's lots of tips and tricks and particular nuances that someone might have come across specific to your environment as part of that migration process. And I also wanted to plug Cloud Cover, which is our latest partnership and product that's come out. Actually, we partnered with them and it came out just after you started your migration, Gary.
Yep.
But if you want to automate and accelerate a potential migration or backup applications once you're in the Qlik Cloud, this is a great product to have a look at. So please do get in touch if you're interested in a demo. It's great to turn in those kind of challenges, complexities around migrating from one environment to Qlik Cloud and simplify that entire process. One of the things it also does is helps publish or migrate the community sheets that you touched on there, Gary, as well. So that could have helped as part of there. But I know you haven't quite answered that question, Gary. So how did you tackle community sheets?
Yeah, the community sheets just something to be aware of. You need to be mindful of that. So all we did is the community sheets are attached in on-prem behind the published sheets, published applications they've got. So what we did is we downloaded that published app, basically changed the permissions to that published app to a user that had full access, and then we went in and we promoted all those sheets into the app. Then we downloaded the app again, brought it over to Qlik Cloud, and then you see that as another application. So we've got an originally deployed app that we forgot the community sheets. I would do that beforehand. But that is one of the questions, Q&A sessions we did with our users. We went out to them, we got a list of the user sheets, which you can get from the QMC. There was around I think it was about 150 odd community sheets across all the apps that were deployed. So we then did a quick spreadsheet on that, sent it out to all the users and said, which ones are you actively using? There's so many users that accidentally hit duplicate sheet from a published app in on-prem, never ever used them. So there was probably, I'd say 60% were dormant and people forgot to delete them. They didn't bother deleting them. We got that list of key sheets that we needed. We then published those sheets into the app, exported it, brought it over to Qlik Cloud. So now we've got two apps. And the nice thing, when it's in the same tenant on the same tenant, you can open both apps and you can literally copy the sheet and paste it straight into your main app. So we then published those. We spoke to everyone and said, are these sheets just yours or can everyone use it? We were confident. Everyone came back and said, no, everyone can see those. So we didn't have to then move it into an individual user. So what happened is our solution just gained an extra 5 or 6 sheets. We initialed it with the user, but everyone could see them. So we didn't have to worry about only having a finance app only seeing this finance sheet, because everyone that's using the app can see all the data. They could build their own sheet anyhow. It didn't matter. So that's how we got around it. And I think it took a day of work at best. And that was even getting all the work done of canvassing the people and talking to the people about what apps they wanted. So it didn't take long.
Okay. And kind of tied in with community sheets, how did you approach personal sheets or also like personal bookmarks? Did you bother with migrating those, or did you elect just to leave those behind?
The bookmarks, we asked and we found out most of our users weren't using bookmarks, and those that weren't using them properly. So it was quite an easy solution. That it was just like, well, okay, there's no need for the bookmarks, so we didn't worry about that. It was purely only the community sheets we transferred. It never really caused us any problems, but if you've got ways of doing that, I'm sure you guys have got ways to do it and fix that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a couple of options there. Obviously, Cloud Cover does most of that. You've also got Qlik CLI. So I know Alex, who's on the call, has done some various work with moving community sheets and personal sheets and getting those to Qlik Cloud on a more automated basis as well. So we do have one question from Craig. He's asked, were you an imprinting user previously? And if so, have you found the cloud alternatives meet all your requirements? So specifically reporting, so distributing, how do you approach distributing reports, if at all, in Qlik Cloud?
We don't. Ours is all on-prem and all basically all present. So people use the apps live all day, every day. And that is one of the reasons why we didn't go for the capacity model. So because people are in it all day, every day. And so it's a different setup we have. So no, we don't use imprinting. I know we've got in Qlik Cloud alerting. So that's something we're going to be looking at. That's a feature that is in Qlik Cloud. Yeah, absolutely. So there's various options and functions that we have available in our suite, but imprinting is not one of them that we've currently used and needed to. So I'm going to bounce that one back to you, Chris, and you can answer that.
So, I mean, it's fair to say it's probably not what Craig's asking, but he doesn't want to hear it from a salesperson. But so you've got reporting services. So that allows you to distribute reports for using or develop those reports using an Excel plugin. You can distribute it in Excel or PDF. You do have subscriptions. So if you just want to take a sheet or a particular visualization, distribute it in PDF or PowerPoint, just with a couple of clicks, Analyzer users can also do those and set those up themselves. And coming very soon, an early adopter program's just started up is Pixel Perfect reports as well. So again, it's not necessarily a guarantee, but it's looking highly likely that a in-browser report builder will be coming to Qlik Cloud in the not too distant future as well. So you do have those. I've not seen any other questions in there, so I've got a couple more just to kind of round off today's call.
Chris.
You're a little bit squeaky there, Neil.
Rather the questions in there.
There are a few,
yes,
yeah.
I had
You've got like a more.
Okay, yeah, we've got a lot. Okay, so we've got one from Mark. Do you still use any servers or infrastructure to support your data feeds into the Qlik Cloud tenant?
We did look at using the gateway, so we looked at that because we've got a SQL server on our LAN basically, so that's our EPOS solution. So we access that SQL server, and before when we were on-prem, we accessed it directly using the connector tools that are on-prem. I'll be honest, we cut corners because we use FileMaker. So FileMaker's got all those hooks and feeds. So it's a piece of software that we've always used and we're familiar with. And at that point, we decided not to have an additional server using that gateway to then interface with our internal systems or other systems into cloud. So what we do is we wrote a solution that exported that data from our sources using FileMaker. We write those files out, and then I pushed it onto Google Workspace. And we put it into a shared drive. Now that Google Workspace shared drive is visible in Qlik on the tenant. So as soon as you drop a file there, you can then get the loads. And that's where we use our trigger. So as we drop the file, FileMaker then can fire a trigger back to Qlik Cloud and then tell it to go reload the data because it knows it's then finished writing that data. So it created a full autonomous process from start to finish. And you never got that point of trying to load when a file was half written and so forth. So no, we didn't need to, but you have the option. You could use the gateway to then do that.
Yeah, so you do get the Qlik Data Gateway as part of your subscription, so that's included. There was a second part to that question of did you have to address any security issues with how Qlik Cloud retrieves your data as well? But I think you kind of covered it there because you're doing a push out to your Google Cloud storage and then reloading from that. It's already in the cloud, so that you're not opening any inbound firewall ports. The same could be said for the Data Gateway as well. So in that instance, you would provision a server within your private network, you'd install the data gateway on there, and it does a push but gives you a pool-like experience, so you don't have to open any inbound firewall ports to connect to on-prem sources like transactional systems, data warehouses that might be there as well. That you get as part of that. There is a second question, or a couple others. Do you use GitOclock? If so, is it good in Qlik Cloud?
Never heard of it, so I'm intrigued with what it is. So please, if anyone knows, please tell.
So that's like a versioning tool. So it's another one of our partners. So that allows you to version out to the likes of like GitHub,
right?
Bitbucket, and all those kind of stuff.
Well, there is an option within the automations. There's and look on the community for this because we looked at it to try and back up our solutions. So obviously there's versioning within Qlik Cloud anyhow. So that versions your script loading and so forth. And we've used that. We've rolled back. So I think it holds 50 sessions of saves within Qlik Cloud. So we've used that. So it's got its own tracking with what you do within the software, within the app. But there are tools out there. There was an automation tool that could then loop through and then export your basically all your apps to GitLab. But that's part of an automation workflow that you can then grab and then use. There's various ones out there that can do that. That's quite good. We've also started to write out, because we're using Google gives you 100 versions of every file that you write to Google Cloud. So for Workspace, so we've started a process of every day writing our QVDs out to there as well. So when we save a QVD, we're going to save a QVD somewhere else. So that way we get versions of our QVDs as well.
Okay, that's a good tip as well. Okay, that sounds good. You mentioned you were looking forward to using the SaaS only features. Are there any particular SaaS only features that you're looking forward to using or have started using since migrating?
I think the biggest thing is I mentioned the admin is brilliant because there's 3 of us that do administration now, whereas before it was always a nightmare because on-prem the owner of the file was only one user. I think that's the biggest change we've had. We get a space, we put as many administrators that you want to manage your solutions in that space. And you can be working on a solution concurrently. Someone could be editing a sheet and changing the layout, and someone could be changing the load. So I think that has been a game changer for us because we can now build simultaneously within an app. And also, if anyone's on holiday, it's not that point of, oh, that person's the owner, I've got to go into the QMC, change the ownership and so forth. So I think that at the moment, as I say, we're only 5 weeks into it, Chris, so I'm not entirely sure what else there is that we would use. But we've noticed there's so many features. Let's say the alerting and so forth was something we'll certainly be looking at.
That's the data. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. And so what you're referring to there, that's the co-development capabilities that you get within shared spaces. So shared spaces were new to Qlik Cloud. You didn't have that kind of option within client managed. So that ability to kind of co-work on the script, but also in the front end at the same time, it does the kind of automatic check-in, check-out. And as you said before, it's got the version of the script, the last 50 versions as part of that. Okay, perfect. So I can't see any new questions there, and I've already fired enough of my own at you. So just to kind of round up, so thank you, Gary, for joining us today. For those on the webinar, please do subscribe to our social channels. We've got YouTube, we've got LinkedIn. A copy of this recording will go out on those later this week, and please do stay in touch. So we do blog quite regularly, so please feel free to sign up to the RSS feeds on those. We also cover kind of Qlik updates and best practices. And if you're interested in migrating, please do reach out. So contact your account manager if you're an existing Qlik customer, or please feel free to get in touch via our website. So that's all we've got time for today. Again, Gary, thank you very much for joining us, and have a good day, everybody.
Wonderful. Cheers, everyone.